friends. Welcome to episode 332 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian, starting my 19th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at @LMS_United. On Threads and Instagram, you can find me at School Librarians United and on Bluesky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. It is now my pleasure to introduce the sponsor of our podcast, Junior Library Guild. What if I told you that there's a collection development service that can save you time and increase title circulation rates? Junior Library Guild does that and more. With their team of experienced media library specialists and publishing industry professionals, every title they recommend is vetted for my readers and organized into categories based on reading level and on interest. Ultimately, Junior Library Guild helps my students foster a love of reading. Use the code UNITED15 to receive 15 free books in your first shipment. And now for today's episode, Imposter Syndrome, and my conversation with Amanda Chacon. Friends, I'm so excited. Amanda Chacon, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, we are in for such a treat. Congratulations. It's your third episode on the podcast. Your first episode, 207, STEM Librarian, and then your second episode was 242, Our Media Virtual Presence. For listeners who are meeting you for the very first time, would you give us an idea of where you work in the country and a little bit about your library? Because I think that's changed over the years. That has changed.
Yes. So again, my name is Amanda Chacon. Nice to meet everybody. I live in Houston, Texas, and currently I'm at a high school library. So for the majority of my librarianship, I've been an elementary school librarian, and I've been in the rotation with the specials, the activity, and I've been in a flexible schedule at the elementary level. I've also been a middle school librarian was a middle school librarian for about 5 years. And then last year, I made the transition to the high school at my district. We are a one district high school, and I'm the sole librarian there. And I serve over 4,000 students and 300 staff. Yes.
I was under the impression that there was a ratio in large, specifically Texas schools, that there's a ratio. Once you hit a certain number of students, you are eligible, not entitled, but eligible for a second full-time school librarian.
That is correct. And it has not happened. I have brought that to the attention of administration, and there are just other priorities at this time.
I understand. All right. So it's not for a lack of trying. All right.
Oh my gosh, no. No, because it is a lot.
Yes. No. And I think 4,000 students. Could you give me an idea of how many teachers you're working with?
I would say, because we're getting new ones all the time, I would say about 150 teachers. And we are a Title I school.
I think you've got your hands full. I will just say that.
I do. But I love my job.
I would like to think that you do not have to defend your job. You do not have to explain to anybody why it's important that you're there. Nobody is scratching their heads and saying, I don't know why we have this person. They don't seem to do anything. So I would like to think that your building values you.
I would like to think so too, especially since The library program in the high school has been relatively dormant the last 20 or so years. And so the teachers and the students are not really used to active programming going on in the library. They're not used to things changing in the library. And so last year was definitely a year of transition. It was, rough at times because, you hear, oh, it's always been done this way. But now we have somebody new, somebody qualified, ready to bring some amazing things to this library. And so coming in this year, it's definitely more of, oh, okay, we can't wait to hear what you're going to do next.
It would have been very hard coming off of the success that you have had in your previous positions to be in a situation where your decisions and judgment was being called into question.
Right. And I think that's kind of what contributed to what we're going to speak about today. Yes, I was getting accolades and getting compliments and everything like that. But at the same time, I was also getting a lot of pushback on my decisions when they're informed decisions. And everything that I do is for, the good of the kids. I keep that in mind.
I think for context, something you and I have discovered a couple of years ago is that my extensive commute home overlaps with you getting out of school. And I'm not going to lie, there were times I really was looking forward to just having a conversation on, we'd call each other and I'd just talk my way home. It was a nice 38 to 48 minute drive. And to have another school librarian just talk about their day and I'd share about my day, that was really cathartic.
I agree. You speak to your spouse, you speak to your friends about what goes on, but unless you're in it, unless you live this every day, there's just not that deep understanding of all the different, hats we wear and things that we do. And so I feel like bouncing my ideas off of you, venting to you was something that was just really necessary to me because as librarians, we often are siloed. We are by ourselves. And, I am the sole librarian here in the high school and I don't have a team to talk to. So you kind of have to make your own team.
Yes. If I could talk to my husband about my job, this podcast would not exist. And I love my sister dearly. She's a lifelong educator, but she's a choir teacher. So even that becomes a little sort of, you really just realize, you can be sympathetic, but you're never going to get it. And she doesn't know what a bad day looks like for me. And I'm learning about her job, but let's be honest, talking to another school librarian in the trenches is really the best way to go. And I hope, we're going into our next school year. I hope we can continue to have our little, phone sessions when we really need to just get it out there and talk to another person. In the spring of 2024, you received quite a bit of fantastic news. You were named SLJ School Librarian of the Year. And I can only imagine that this was very exciting, but also a very overwhelming time for you.
Absolutely. So when I got that phone call, it was actually in January is when I got the phone call and I had to keep it, under wraps until it came out at the end of March. I just didn't believe it. I thought that I was getting the phone call to say, thank you for your application. We appreciate your time, because they're very nice people over there at SLJ. And so I was questioning. I was like, really? Me? Really? Like the main one, like the big one, the big shebang, I said. And Kathy, the editor, was like, yes, it's you. And I didn't know quite how to feel at first. I was like ecstatic, but at the same time, I knew, okay, all eyes are going to be on me now. And people are going to be talking about me, whether it's, good, bad. Now that I put myself out there, I'm not in charge now of how it goes. People are going to just receive it and make their own conclusions. So that's a bit scary.
I honestly hadn't thought about it in great depth. And that's because I will never find myself in this particular situation. But you're right, because regardless of what you do, other people are going to form their own conclusions about the process and you, because invariably, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, there are other people who applied for this and did not get it. Anytime we put ourselves out there, we invite scrutiny. We make ourselves vulnerable. It creates an opportunity for us to question if we are even deserving of such a recognition. It is natural that we're going to feel this sense of imposter syndrome.
And once I started looking more into imposter syndrome, when I first heard about it, I didn't quite understand what it meant. And so I looked a little bit more into it, and I'm like, that's exactly how I'm feeling, because I'm not the one with the most Instagram followers. I'm not the one winning every single award that there is to win. I'm not the one doing a ton of presentations, across the country or even in my own state. I'm the one that is just working every day, making my library a great place for my students, and then sharing that information out the best that I could. And so that's when I was like, am I doing enough? Is what I'm doing relevant? Is what I'm doing resonating, not just with my school community, but school communities across the nation? Can people learn from me? And that's when I really started grappling with the imposter syndrome. It's like, I think I'm doing enough, but my enough may look very different than somebody else's enough. And I think that's really important to have these conversations, because I was seeing, and I still see, amazing librarians share on Instagram, on TikTok, and all of that. And I'm like, I could never do that. There's just no way. Whether it's budget, time, just the climate, the atmosphere of the school, there's just absolutely no way I could do something like that. But it took a while for me to learn that does not mean I am not enough.
In my own self-assessment, I find that there's so many areas in which I professionally come up short. I completely agree that it is possible to excel in some areas, but in other areas, absolutely not. And I know for me professionally, I don't write. There are very few things I have ever published because I don't write, and absolutely zero positions in leadership. Zero. I have never felt that I was good at being on committees. I tried, I failed, I didn't enjoy it. And being in leadership is for me did not involve being active in my own state organization. So I like you can do amazing things in one area of your profession, but in others, you're like, no, absolutely not. I don't do any of those things. So
Exactly. And I think it's important to bring that to light, because we are only seeing, the best, right? When somebody posts on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, we're only seeing the best. We don't necessarily see the struggle that they go through behind the scenes. And it's important, I think, to talk about that, because I personally know many librarians who feel like they cannot share, or they don't want to share because they'll be judged, because it's not necessarily at the level that they think they should be based on what they're seeing other librarians doing. And it's like, no, we are a highly scrutinized profession. We have eyes on us, and I think kind of bonding together in our struggles is really important as well. Like, it's not going to be easy for any of us.
I'm glad you brought up social media because it is such a curated view of somebody's existence, whether it's professional or family. We only reveal the best of what we've got. And it's so contrived, when it's manufactured. So when you realize what's on social media, it is the product of a great deal of trial and error. And you might see something that has been edited and edited and edited. So, and forgive me, but friends, I'm going to spend hours on the conversation that I have with Amanda, making it perfect. And and it's not perfect, it's going to be as perfect or close to perfect as I can. And I do edit because I doubt I would get as much enthusiastic participation if people sensed I was doing nothing with the audio. We do not do video for a reason. I would not do video. I don't expect my guests to want to do video. And so, again, very contrived. We're going to create a situation where you and I can have a conversation. I'm going to make sure it's been trimmed up, and we make sure that we're both going to be happy with this conversation. But I want to ask you, it wasn't just SLJ's Librarian of the Year. You actually had a couple more recognition sort of awards during that time, which really sort of made this whole experience, sort of compounded the feelings associated with this experience.
Exactly. I was getting like a lot of eyes on me, a lot of comments, because I was also Library Journal Mover and Shaker in 2024. And then I was Sam Houston State University Distinguished Educator of the Year, which is one of 5. And that's a big deal. It's all a big deal, honestly. But at the time, I was just kind of going on autopilot, like, okay, I know I've been doing great things. I know I have, but it's definitely not to the level that I see other people doing on social media. And so I felt like, is this a bit of luck? Is this because maybe they weren't applying? I started questioning myself. And, I'm hearing though from all these people, no, you're great. You're doing great things. You're impacting the students. You're impacting the staff. You're impacting the community. And I just had to kind of have some conversations with people, because that's how I work through things, is I talk it out. Say, I feel like I don't do enough, but do I do enough to you? It's just kind of like, yes, Amanda, you do. Like, you do. And that's why I think it's really important to have these conversations, because I was like, there's no way. There's no way it's me, because little me with my, 800 followers, like, who's paying attention to me? But what we might not realize is that we have these like micro impacts. So maybe I posted about my seed library, and a couple of students saw it, and then they came in and got some seeds, and now they feel more a part of the community. Or maybe it sparked some kind of idea in one or two other librarians who saw that. That's making an impact. It's not necessarily on this big, grand, colossal social media scale, but that's what we're here for, is to inspire and support each other.
I like that you use the word lucky because, one would make you say, oh, wow, that's random. That's very random. 3 awards in the span of several months. That's not luck. Okay. And forgive me, but it's not like those 3 entities talk to each other. It's not like everybody got together and said, hey, it is Amanda Chacon's turn, Nobody did that. Those entities work independently of one another. And the fact, I think you were having a really good year. How about we just go with,
I was.
You were having a really good year. Friends, I am pretty candid with anybody who cares to know. I submitted my own application for Library Journal's Mover and Shaker Award because I was encouraged by fellow school librarians who also did the same. These awards do not have any provision stating that you can't. And I don't feel bad about it. I really don't. And when it comes to Mover and Shaker, I have, ever since I received that award, I have been fairly vocal about encouraging anybody who is willing to put in the time to fill out those applications and provide the documentation that they need to, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I'm not going to apologize. And the committee can do what they want. But if your name hasn't been submitted, waiting for somebody to come out of the ether to decide they're going to do that for you, I'm sorry, but you're going to be disappointed.
And that brings up a really great point about advocacy, because we always talk about how to advocate for our students, for our libraries, but do we know how to advocate for ourselves? And I think a lot of us maybe feel like we cannot because of imposter syndrome, or tendrils of imposter syndrome. But that's a really important part of being a librarian is that you're kind of a built-in leader, whether you want to be or not, because generally you're the only one on your campus. So I really feel you when you say, submitting your own application. For a couple of them, I like the Sam Houston, I did. And that was my second time submitting it because I did not get it the first time, but I was like, I'm gonna keep going until somebody tells me to stop. Because you're right. No, the worst they can say is no.
I think that something that's also worth mentioning is these awards, it's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game. If I win a recognition, that means somebody else didn't. I can't be recognized for the work I'm doing in my profession without somebody else missing out on this opportunity.
That reminds me of the whole idea that not everybody can get a trophy because we hear this from, parents and community that not everyone can win a trophy, right? Some of the kids have to learn the hard lessons, and I guess that applies to adults as well. But that does not mean that what that student is doing is not relevant, amazing, great. And that does not mean just because you did not win the award that what you're doing is not having an impact. It's just the whim of the committee at the time. So I think if you feel very strongly that you are doing the work that the award recognizes, then keep applying. If you don't win one time, try again the next year until you get tired of it.
I talked to Melissa Corey from Missouri about Chapter of the Year, AASL's Chapter of the Year. I know they applied multiple times. The precarious nature of school librarians means that we have learned that we have to advocate for our jobs. And in doing so, we have to sort of toot our own horn. We can't be afraid to be loud and proud about promoting what we do and the value we bring to our school communities. And yet, I remember being trained as a child, being reminded by my mother not to brag. And I remember it was one of the times that my mother was telling me I shouldn't do something. And it was really it really was something I internalized because this idea of bragging, nobody likes a bragger. Nobody wants to see you brag about anything. And I don't know if that's a 70s thing. I don't know if it's a gender thing. I don't know if it just was a way to make sure you weren't alienating people as a little kid. You didn't want to be that person who bragged all the time. And it really was sort of trained out of me. I learned I shouldn't brag.
I was the same way. I was an 80s kid, and I was told you should not be bragging about what you're doing, that your work will speak for itself. But then I became a librarian. And it just kind of changed the game. You have to advocate for your program because so many people misunderstand what we do. So many people do not understand the intricacies of our job. And so within that comes the self-advocacy part. And that is, it could be something as simple as sharing an email with your administrator. Hey, look at what we did today and sharing some pictures. That right there is advocating for yourself. And it could be something as big as applying for SLJ Librarian of the Year. I mean, your enough, again, is going to look different than somebody else's enough. And, as long as we're moving forward in our profession, I think we're all winners in that regard.
Well, and I like that you talk about moving forward. I think we're going to talk about growth towards later on in the conversation, because really when it's about growing and moving from one place in your role to another, it really is important. I'm going to ask you, did you ever experience imposter syndrome as a classroom teacher? Because I was a classroom teacher for roughly 9 years. There was a little bit of maternity leave inserted in there. But for roughly 9 years, I was a classroom teacher as a high school social studies teacher. I have zero recollection of ever feeling this way when I was in the traditional classroom setting. I never felt like I was competing with anybody else in my department. To be sure, I knew I wasn't the worst teacher in my department. But other than that, it was really just, I was sort of in a survival mode when I was in the classroom. I really didn't feel like if I did something, it would in any way impact my colleagues. And we all were in one big long hall, and there was about 8 of us. But again, it was never a matter of being better than them. It was a matter of doing our jobs every day. My department wasn't optional. And that's a conversation I've had to have with my assistant. My assistant is a retired math teacher, and he's amazing. But I've explained to him more than once, it's not like anybody decided 6th grade math was going to be cut due to budgets. Nobody is cutting 6th grade math. He taught 6th and 7th grade math. And for 23 years, I'm like, never did you ever wonder if your job was on the chopping block. I was still in library school when I was told you are always on the chopping block and you need to work like that every single year. Don't take anything for granted.
Wow. Going back to your first question, I did not have imposter syndrome as a classroom teacher. I was a classroom teacher for 6 years, and I taught high school English, all different levels. And I think part of the reason why I did not have imposter syndrome is because there's not like tons of award for English teachers, first of all, but most of all, I always had just a built-in support committee. Like you said, you're generally in the same area, you have department meetings, you see each other every single day. And so I could speak to somebody every single day about what I'm going through and they understand. That's really hard to do when you're the only one in the school. Just last week, they're like, okay, it's time for department meetings. And I'm a department of 1. So I said, I guess I'm going to go have a nice little conversation with my department of 1. So I think that contributes, that isolation can contribute to imposter syndrome in our profession.
Wow. Is now the time we should start to talk about the phrase, fake it till you make it? Because I think so much is expected of us that we have to feign confidence when navigating new challenges because we are expected to know everything. And I know you going into your 2nd year of high school, honest to goodness, I have been faking it for a long time. And going into year 5 now in my high school, I feel like it has all started to click. It's all started to fall into place. I've been at the school now for 4 years, and I don't feel like I'm faking it anymore. But 100%, those first couple of years, people come to me and say, hey, can you help me? And I'm like, absolutely. Let's.
Yes.
It's just, my expertise may be fake, but my sincere hope that I can successfully assist my teachers and my students is authentic. So I think that's what I've been able to, how I've rationalized the position I've held now for 4 years, is that I don't ever expect to know everything, but my conviction to be the person to help you in any aspect that comes across my threshold, comes through my door. How can I help you? What can I do for you? And it may be a scramble and it may not be pretty, but I'm authentic in what I want to do to help.
I think that right there, the faking it till we make it also can contribute and deepen imposter syndrome because we might feel like we are supposed to be the experts on campus, right? You are the librarian, you're the original search engine, as they say. So you're supposed to know everything. But the reality is we can't and we don't. But we want to. We want to help. And so I think just kind of unraveling that sincerity that you mentioned is really important, recognizing I would love to collaborate with you, math teacher. I've never done it before. I'm not quite sure where to start, but let me do some research and get some ideas and get back to you instead of just pretending that, I know everything.
Impetus for this conversation, friends. It is the summertime right now. I actually was listening to the Atlantic app. I have a teacher subscription, which is nice. It's $30 a year. And I like listening to the articles. And there is an article that appeared on my feed, and it's How to Know You Are Not a Phony by Arthur C. Brooks. And I was listening to this, and I knew I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. And I knew that going back to the conversations that Amanda and I had, going back now for a while, I knew that this would be a conversation that could relate to some really heavy emotions that I know, Amanda, you were grappling with during that year, during last year. And forgive me, I've felt like an imposter through many different periods of my journey as a school librarian. So I'm very grateful you agreed to share some thoughts because right now it is the summer and it is, I know you're getting back into school and it's a busy time for you. So thank you so much. But I don't know, when you listen to this article, it was pretty validating for me. I don't know about you.
It was. And I like that you bring up that imposter syndrome is not just special to librarians, right? It's something that a lot of people experience. And a lot of those people that experience it are usually the experts in their field, high ranking officials, people who tend to be kind of isolated in what they do. And that's us. That's librarians. And I know plenty of people in real life, in my real life, like who do other jobs who sometimes feel like I I I don't even know if what I'm doing is right, but I'm still just going to keep doing it. And I'm like, that's how I feel.
Hmm. Absolutely. And more, I think people who might never have experienced imposter syndrome, I think we were all very much pulled out of our comfort zone during the pandemic when we were all doing things remotely. And I think for many people, that was the sort of great equalizer because you take people who were confident and capable and remove them from the very familiar setting and expect to do the fantastic job they're doing every day in now something that's completely turned on its end. And so, no, I really encourage anybody, you can read the article or you can listen to it. It is not just a librarian thing for sure. I was amused by the tests. There was a short test. There was one that you could do online, and then there's a 20-question test called the Clance IP Scale. I've linked both of them in the show notes. I have to ask, did you at all look into those? I tried one, and I was wondering if I was being completely honest in my responses on the online one.
You know, it's interesting. I took both of the tests. So I took the one where you kind of circle on paper or on your phone, and then I took the actual online test, and I got two different answers. And I think I know why. So in the 20 question one, the Clance IP scale, I did get like heavy imposter syndrome one, whatever it is called, like intense imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
And then the online one, I was like low imposter syndrome. But the online test asks questions about if you are willing to try new things that you've never done before. And so I answered yes to that because that is our job. So I think that kind of skewed the results a little bit because if you are not constantly trying new things, then you know, you are stagnant and it can get a little boring. So I'm always like, I'm going to try something new, even if I don't know what I'm doing, even if it might fail. That doesn't, you know, that does not contribute to my imposter syndrome.
Exactly, exactly. Wow. And, again, regardless of how you feel about taking these tests, it is interesting to ask yourself some of those questions in the context of the job we do every day. And it's just a way for us to think a little differently about where we see ourselves in the larger picture of how our school functions, for sure. A line stood out for me especially, quote, "The fact that you have to worry means you probably aren't a phony. The true phony is convinced they're not one," end quote.
So true.
I was,
It reminds me of the if you think you're crazy, then you're probably not. You know, if you are constantly reflecting on your journey, then you're more self aware. And I think the more self aware you are, the more you can become privy to imposter syndrome because you're like, well, I'm doing this XYZ and she's doing ABC. And should I be doing ABC? So I think that really resonates because I think we've all experienced that particular quote.
So Margaret Sullivan of Missouri, and she and I saw each other this week. It was fantastic. It's like when you meet somebody, you're like fangirling because Margaret Sullivan has been a mentor to me, unbeknownst to her. She's been my mentor since 2019. She wrote an article. Oh, I've actually printed it out, and I look at it often. And her article was called "Your PLN, Source of Inspiration or Thief of Joy?" And this idea that we compare and despair, that we look at each other and the job we do. And this goes back to what you were saying about social media. And for me to compare what I do in my high school to what you do in your high school, while that could create some opportunities for me to do some really cool things, I could also look at all those amazing things that you do and feel like I'm a failure. And Margaret was very specific about do not compare yourself to other people, especially in what we do, because contextually, we are in very diametrically different places in our school, geography, profession. I mean, there are so many factors which have to be considered. It's like you're not comparing apples to apples, like you're comparing apples to Volkswagens. Like you're like, there's no, just, so yes, I am very grateful. This article, I will see if I can put a copy of it because I read it often because this compare and despair is, of course it's going to happen because we're not working in the same situation.
Yeah, and I think I brought that up earlier too, is that you may be looking at somebody who has an extremely supportive administrator, they have a large budget, they have a small school, and that's a completely different situation than you might be in. And so your enough is going to look very different than their enough. And so we have to maybe support each other more on each other's enough, as opposed to here's my enough and everybody should do my enough.
Or just our intention. Like, are we going in there with the right frame of mind that we are there to make a difference? I am aware there are librarians every day, and their library is a repurposed classroom. And then there are those of us who work in a space which rivals the size of the cafeteria. It's the biggest classroom in the school, or a gymnasium. I mean, but those differences should not matter. What is most important is that we are there to support our school community in the capacity that we are able with the conditions that are there. And we're always pushing to make sure we do we're bringing the best that we can to our students and our staff every day. The author of this article provides 3 things you can do if you experience imposter syndrome. This first one really surprised me. And but the first piece of advice is don't talk to yourself like someone you hate. I would like to think that I don't do that, but I have to imagine that when we become critical of ourselves, we have to be very aware of that.
And, that can also take or internalize other people saying maybe some negative things about what you're doing and internalizing that. And that becomes your thought process too. So it's not necessarily just you talking about yourself, but also other people talking about what you're doing, on social media, leaving comments or other teachers making snide remarks. That's not necessarily a reflection of what you just mentioned, your North Star, which are the students, the school community. And that's really, because to me, when I read that, I was like, well, I don't do that. But then what I do is I internalize other people's thoughts. And that is kind of the same thing.
Exactly. And we all, throughout our professions, can think back on somebody who is ignorant has said that was insensitive. Mm-hmm. We have all encountered a non-librarian. Perhaps they weren't trying to be cruel, but the thoughtless comment came across as cruel. and ill-informed. And again, when we assign those kinds of comments into the category of you are ignorant, you are an ignorant person to not understand the complexity of my job, but it still stings. And we have to be very aware of the source of that criticism. And when we hear it, that we need to make sure we relegate it to a place of ignorance.
Yeah, they're uninformed.
The next one I thought was really important was track your progress. And this goes back to your comment about growth. I mean, you are going into year 2 in your space. I'm going into year 5 in the space I'm in. What kind of growth can we see? Because to the non-school librarian, our spaces are simply just room. Oh, it's just a room with books. I say just because that's all they see. They don't see the intentionality. They don't see the education that went into making and creating what is available to them in terms of programming and in terms of physical resources, print resources, digital resources. All of that is a product of the training that we've experienced.
So tracking my progress actually has really helped me kind of overcome this sense of imposter syndrome. There's a couple different ways that I do it. I do track my progress in terms of winning any kind of accolade and also publications, presentations. I consider those a win. So if you're doing that, definitely, I just have a Google Doc going with what I did and when I did it. But another thing that I did that really resonates with my administration or anybody who may not completely understand all the facets of my job is every year I take my evaluation sheet, which has it's like 4 different domains and the objectives in them. I put that in a document, and then as the year goes through, I put how I met or exceeded each particular objective specifically. So, for instance, one domain is talking about librarians should engage in the community at large through different programmings and events and such like that. So then I would put, I hosted a literacy night, I hosted book fairs, and I link to my posts that I do. I link to pictures. I can give you some, I've shared an example before, but I'll be happy to share again because what it does is it keeps track for me too. Like, wow, I'm really killing it in this one particular area. And then maybe I need to shift some focus to another area of my evaluation that's maybe not necessarily on my radar right now. That's helped a ton.
Well, and I know when I measure, we use the Charlotte Danielson tool. And so I put my domains over and I like you, create a little spreadsheet. You've got those domains and then you populate it with the things that you do as you do. I will say, because I'm on a flexible schedule, I create a daily log. And I have a spreadsheet, and across the top of the spreadsheet, it includes sharing resources and supporting teachers and supporting students and supporting administrators. And I keep track of those because, I want to make sure that when I do have to provide that documentation, if you had asked me, what did you do yesterday? I'm like, I helped people. Oh, well, can you be more specific? Well, now I can, because for the last couple of years, I've done this on a daily basis. I just have it running in the background, a Google Sheet, and it helps me when I am asked to justify and defend. And how, in what ways did you satisfy these criteria in your evaluation? It's been really helpful. This next piece of advice I love because I think we do this so well. It says, get some company. In other words, find your people and rally, because that at least was my takeaway when I read that part of the article.
Right. And I think that can be difficult for some librarians who do work by themselves and they may be more introverted. And that's me. And so what I started doing was just commenting on people's posts and messaging, asking questions. And I formed a lot of relationships that way. And you really get to, as you say, rally the troops around each other when you start just engaging with other people. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to put yourself way out there, but you'll be surprised. Most librarians that I've been in contact with are very willing to talk about the profession, about the struggles that we go through, about different things that they're doing. And that's really helped me overcome a lot of my fear of doing new things, but also my insecurities as well.
I have surprised a few people that I have met when I've asked if we can just text. Can we just text? And this applies to colleagues at work and school librarians I meet at conferences and opportunities. I'm like, can we just text? And it is remarkable how those background conversations really sometimes are all the encouragement I need. When it comes to my colleagues at work, sometimes having that background conversation provides me instant context for things that are happening and a larger appreciation for the dynamic in the school. And it's because I've given basically, I've become friends who text with a lot of people who join my staff. But it also means that when we need support, we can call on each other really quickly. Similarly, with our fellow school librarians, you and I text, but sometimes I'm like, actually, can we just turn this into a phone call? Because I'm getting in the car right now.
Right. Right. And there we go, 45 minutes later. Yes.
And you know what? And then by the time I'm pulling in my driveway, I don't know about you, I feel a lot better. I think it is really important that we have people in our lives, both in person. I mean, forgive me, Amanda, when was the last time we met each other in person?
Never. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
It is someday. Someday it is. Oh my gosh. That's okay. I am embarrassed, but I couldn't remember if we've ever met in person. And there's a reason, because we never have.
Nope. We never have. No, it's just the stars have never aligned.
That's okay. That's okay. Because you know what? We text all the time. And you know what? Every once in a while we record an episode. Oh, I love that. So yes, get some company, friends. Your PLN does not have to be in person. Your PLN does not have to meet you for drinks after work. Your PLN can be a bunch of people who, when you're having a moment, you can just say, I'm sorry, can you talk? Or can we talk on the way home? And absolutely. So Amanda, I was amused to read that, according to this article, the older you get, the less likely you are to experience imposter syndrome. And I'm not going to out them, but I've had this confirmed by other librarians who are similarly aged. I'm 55, and I feel like probably 18 years ago when I started my career as a school librarian and going into the first couple of years of what I was doing, I really experienced a great deal of imposter syndrome. And by virtue of changing jobs, I have continued to challenge myself. And I feel like I am far better equipped now at 55 to handle any of these examples of self-doubt. I think I'm far less critical of myself as a 55-year-old than I was when I was 40.
Right. I think it's kind of like exercising a muscle. Whenever you hear those, like we talked about earlier, those comments about what you're doing or what you're not doing, you start to realize where it's coming from. And the more you start to recognize, oh, it's coming from a place of maybe they don't quite understand exactly what I'm doing. You do that over and over, it becomes a habit. And then the more you do it, the more comfortable you, oh, yes, they're just uninformed. I am getting there slowly but surely. But again, it's always a journey, especially if you are someone who is more quiet, more introverted, more sensitive. It's a little bit more difficult to exercise that muscle of not caring what other people say.
No, I agree. And I'm very grateful that you agreed that this is a conversation we should share. It's a very different situation when you and I are just driving home in the car after a long day and we're just talking. and it's just between the two of us. I think there's something very different when you put ideas out there and really require our listening audience to do some of their own self-examination. I hope that this conversation is helpful to people tuning in. And I know going into this next school year, there's a lot of people who are tuning in right now who might be starting new jobs. We might have some brand new school librarians who have never been a librarian before. Lots of kudos for finding the podcast, because the podcast was something I created because I desperately needed something like this when I was starting out, and it didn't exist, at least not that I could find. So let me ask you, Amanda, tell us where you are in your beginning of your school year and year 2 at your high school. Have you returned to school already?
Yes, I've been back for about 2 weeks already. Got everything ready to go. Feel a little bit more comfortable, more confident, excited. I do share out quite frequently what I'm doing, what works and what doesn't work. So I definitely do share my failures on social media. But I am excited about this year.
Excellent. Would you let listeners know how to follow you on social media? Because it really is helpful to be able to find, people sharing the ideas. And I know that you, especially when you do your programming, you share it out. And it's really helpful. So let us know where we can find you on social media.
Of course. So I mostly post on Instagram under OpenBookAmanda, but you can also find me on Bluesky. I grab the handle of Goodreads. Twitter, I don't post as much, but I'm under the Goodread. And TikTok, again, I'm not super into TikTok, but I'm under the Goodread there. And feel free to follow me, send me a message if you want to talk about some of the things that we discussed today during the episode.
Absolutely, 100%. Amanda Chacon, I hope you have a fantastic year 2 in your high school. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. If you're curious to know how often your state has been featured on the podcast, simply click on the link which can be found in our show notes of every episode, search by title, author, state, and country, and do a Command F search. I hope you take a look at the link to Junior Library Guild in our show notes. Use the code UNITED15 and receive 15 free books with your very first shipment. As many of us are getting ready to go back and start our new school year, and others of us are still enjoying summer vacation, I am currently juggling several outlines and tentative recording dates. You can be sure our upcoming episode will showcase amazing school librarians sharing their strategies and resources. I hope you will tune in.